This feels like a new thing. Holy Spirit moving. With you, there's no losing hope on my mind. This feels like.
Hey y'all, it is me, Elisha Nicole. Welcome to Disciplined by Design. I am here today to welcome you and introduce you to the Trauma Center and how I disarmed my triggers. If you are not yet following me on Instagram, you should. My Instagram handle is disciplinedxdesign. On my Instagram page, I have been slowly introducing you to how I've been disarming my triggers and how to drop your baggage, move forward, and live a trigger free life. Now, in doing so, it means that I also have to lead by example. So in order to introduce you to myself and the Trauma Center, I am here today with a shredder, some recycling bags, some water, because this is going to be quite the video, and my trauma. Start with today's video on how to co-parent with a narcissist. This is going to be hard because in the Trauma Center, we talk about noun bombs, and I'm not sure if I can say bombs. So this moment forward is going to be called noun triggers. And those are the people, places, and things that cause you to have an adverse reaction, that cause you to make yourself small or make yourself extremely large in reactions, and you don't quite know where these traumas are coming from. Today's video is not just an introduction to the Trauma Center, but it's about me shredding 8 years of conversations, text messages, pictures, and emails. What does this have to do with co-parenting with a narcissist? Luckily for this narcissist, I was already extremely traumatized when we conceived my son. So I had a hard time articulating certain things. When you're used to being silenced, when you're used to people, I used to and kind of still get bullied for my command of the English language, even though it's my first language. It's just, it created an insecurity about the way that I speak. Sometimes, even in the middle of an argument or a heated conversation, I'll go to Google the definition of a word just to make sure that what I'm hearing in my head and what I'm saying actually makes sense. And sometimes I obsess over situations, and sometimes that causes me to sit down and reflect about how I showed up in conversations. Where did it start? Where did it go wrong? And I really have to big up my parents, because in the first year, I wanted so badly to have a positive co-parenting situation that I wavered a lot. And it was easy for me to do this wavering because I never really had boundaries in place to begin with. And if I did have boundaries in place, my no would have been no, and I probably wouldn't be sitting here having this video right now. And if my no was no, in the beginning, throughout my pregnancy, after delivery, throughout my son's life, there was a lot of conversations that we could have avoided. And because I didn't really have boundaries and I wavered a lot on a lot of things, for example, my parents were like, do not hyphenate or give him the last name. Don't let him sign the birth certificate. And I did the complete opposite for the sake of peace. And that didn't work out for me, child. I say this to say that if it wasn't for them, there's a lot of conversations that would have been a lot worse than they started out as. And it takes yourself stepping away from the situation sometimes and looking back to say, okay, you know what? You could have handled that differently. And there are times where I showed up in conversations and situations that are not appealing. So it's not 100% on him. There are times where in this mess, I did not do myself or my son any justice. How did this come to be? When you're not sure of yourself, and when you have conversations with somebody who says, I never said that, I didn't do that, you start to pull up the conversations and save them. One thing he said to me throughout my pregnancy and throughout majority of my son's life is, you're going to have to tell him why he doesn't have a dad. You chose this. You should have had an abortion. And this video is not to turn this evidence into a video evidence. So I don't need to go into detail about a lot of things. And if you want, you can go back through my TikTok, Disciplined X Design. There is a video there that does highlight a lot of the things that I went through. But when you go through so many of those conversations, you start to keep the conversations that help explain the answer to those questions and statements that he made. Let me just actually explain, before I go further into how to co-parent with a narcissist, what the Trauma Center is. In the Trauma Center, first workbook is called I Am Triggered, and this was triggered by me being triggered. Let's just get real. I'm almost always triggered, right? I have complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I've been traumatized my entire life, and I didn't realize until I started trauma therapy that I was walking around with this baggage, and that's the reason why I showed up the way that I did. And then when you are in friendships and relationships that constantly remind you that you weren't raised properly, you don't come from nowhere, you're this and you're that, you start to question who you really are. Let's be real here. And that's some of the stuff that, like, at one point when I was in an argument with my child's father, I said, hold on, I come from somewhere. I am somebody. I am the great granddaughter of two very prominent bishops. I am in a my family is well off. Just because you see that I'm in a certain stage of life and I may be ghetto or ratchet or whatever you labeled me as, to you and how I showed up in your life, I come from somewhere. I need to stop settling for this level of treatment. I need to stop. There were times where we'd have conversations and arguments, and I'm like, this man is baiting me so that he can be like, see, this is why I don't do X, Y, and Z. She's the problem. And I had to step away from it. And one of the major things that was a flag that proved it to me was an argument that took place that involved him calling the police on me. And his partner was like, don't go to stage 2. And I'm like, so this was stage 2? I need to stop reacting. How do I stop reacting? You have to figure out why you're reacting that way in the first place. You need to figure out what triggers and traumas are there. Where did it come from? And slowly, a lot of memories that I had suppressed throughout my childhood started to come back to me when I started asking myself these questions. In the trauma center, we discuss what triggers are, what trauma is, and to stop accepting trauma responses as personality traits. We've adopted these things and said, that's just who I am. We read a 1-2 astrology post and say, oh, that's what a Virgo is. That's what a Scorpio, that's me. That's me. That's the reason why I am the way that I am. And we put all these labels, and the labels are band-aids that we put over the wounds that turn into smelly, infected trauma responses that enter conversations before we do. We discuss reward system. Reward systems is a way to replace your current unhealthy coping mechanisms, be it alcohol, be it drugs, be it partners, be it environments, the inability to keep relationships. We replace and we discuss stimulating our senses, smell, and we also discuss safety planning. Because we are in the trauma center and we are digging up trauma, it can cause an adverse reaction in the process of digging up that trauma. So we want to have a safety plan in place. We also break down the impact. The impact is the trauma. After the impact is the injuries. What did that trauma cause? When you're traumatized, when you're in a situation where you enter fight or flight mode, your brain goes into protection mode. And whatever you use as a coping mechanism in that moment became your pacifier. So every time you feel similar situations or emotions, you go back to that comfort. You go back to that pacifier. That is where the treatment is. The treatment is your pacifier. What have you been using as ointment to the injury that took place? Has it fully healed, or have you just been covering up that wound that will become a scar at some point? We talk about trauma ages. We talk about trauma bonds. We go through different tools and resources. We review what we've learned, and then we journal. And I love the aspect of being able to walk away from what you learned in that specific day in the workshop, journaling it, and taking a moment to reflect about how you showed up for yourself. People may not like the way you showed up for them, but how you show up for yourself matters. And the fact you survived that trauma, how you handled it may not have been the best in the moment, but you did what was best for yourself and you went for what you knew. So you need to congratulate yourself for surviving this far. While identifying your cycles and patterns, you will slowly begin to disarm your triggers. This will activate a domino effect, which will lead to you discarding, dismantling, and disengaging with the people, places, and things, noun triggers, that are encouraging your trauma responses and that are the trauma bonds that are infecting some of your wounds. Your trauma nouns. I related myself when I realized and stepped out. It took a serious time. I needed to sit down with self. When I realized that I was a game of Minesweeper. If you don't know what Minesweeper is, you're too young for me and I can't talk to you. I realized that at any moment you could step on a noun trigger and I was going to go off. And a lot of things that I used to self soothe and comfort involved soul ties, involved pain. Pain was a really big thing for me. So at one point, I had my ears covered in piercings, my eyebrow was pierced, I had both my nostrils pierced, I had a double tongue piercing, double belly button, any piercing you can think of. I have maybe like 18 to 21 tattoos, and I ran to what was familiar, and that was pain. The more it hurt, the more I liked it. I had to get out of that cycle as well, because that led to me being in unhealthy relationships, that led to me not having a sense of self-worth and accepting that, you know what, nobody will actually really love me or appreciate me, so it is what it is. And where did that lead me? Into a domino effect of more trauma. And at any point you can go off, it makes it hard for people to get close to you. Each time you fall into the trapdoor of trauma responses, you have another unhealed wound, another mental room to hide in, and the older you get, the more consequences for your actions. When you use sex, partners, infidelity, like whatever you call it, sneaky links, that's your cup of tea. Whenever you use something to soothe a trauma wound, you're now opening a domino effect of more unhealed wounds. For sex, you can end up with pregnancy, STIs, soul ties, emotional attachments, confusing relationships, not understanding why you're in certain situations. And I use sex because we're talking about co-parenting, right? Sex has a 3-stage negotiation, especially when it comes to pregnancy. At each stage has its own wound to heal. People are often judged for how they handle their decision making, but only 2 people are at the negotiation table. Hopefully, it's just 2 people. And they both walk away from it with their own hit, impact, and treatment. The first stage is the clear decision to take the steps to prevent pregnancy and or STIs. And I'm sorry, but the pull-out method is not an effective form of prevention. The second stage is the decision to keep or terminate the pregnancy, especially if it's discussed beforehand that the person who you're sleeping with is not going to have an abortion. Then you might want to think twice about whether or not you're going to use certain steps or preventions. The third stage is the decision to put the baby up for adoption or to bring the baby home. At this point, you can no longer blame your trauma for your actions. You have to deal with the consequences. And the unfortunate part is, if it's not you who's making these decisions, if it's alcohol, if it's drugs, if it's other people, if it's people pleasing, whatever your trauma response is, you are left with the consequences of taking care of that wound and cleaning up that mess. We set goals. When setting these goals, we dissect the circumstance versus your destination. So my current circumstances do not look like where I'm headed to, what my goals are, what my prayer board has, okay? We're not settling for less out here no more, child. We're not letting people tell us what we are capable of, who we are, and how we're gonna show up in the room. This is very important for me, because I found that during trauma therapy, after my session was up, I would sit there and I'm like, I'd go back to my unhealthy coping mechanisms. We triage the triggers. So even if you want to book a one-on-one coaching session with me after therapy, you don't have to go through the full trauma center with me. You can book a one-on-one coaching session as an aftercare to go through what you dissected in trauma therapy and how to get through what you've learned and how to process those triggers so that they do not affect you today. We triage the triggers and we discuss the reality of what is, when it's not healed, what happens. So if you don't heal it, it gets passed down. What happened in my co-parenting situation is it started to get passed down to my son, which is one of the things that I did not want. And being a daddy's girl, being somebody who was raised by a single father, being somebody who loved my dad to death, but there was a certain reverent fear for him as well, that I did not want to show up less than. I did not want to disappoint him. I did not, there's times where that man scared me, child. And it's not in an abusive way, but there was always that part of me that just wanted my parents to just love me. It was very embarrassing to come home in the situation that I did, to say to them, by the way, I'm pregnant, and this is the situation I'm pregnant in, and this is who I'm pregnant for. And though there was doubts in his mind, child, there was nobody else's name for me to call. So it was very, listen, like I said, I come from somewhere, so my parents have certain expectations for me, and that created a wound in itself that I didn't realize was there. There was that little girl who was like, I dropped the ball, I failed, and I made a mistake. And we discuss how your upbringing may have shaped your attitude and beliefs. And this includes dissecting generational trauma and secondhand trauma. Like I said, whatever you don't heal gets passed down to your children. So that means that whatever your parents didn't heal got passed down to you. And whatever their parents didn't heal. Listen, child, when I say generational trauma, and this also means that the trauma that you didn't cause, your parents didn't cause, wasn't generational. You just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. If you were at the park and it got shot up and now you're at home, can't listen to the sound of gunshots. If you are, this is maybe just a trigger warning for some people, so I should have put that out there. This is a trigger warning. If you are somebody who survived war, if you survived domestic abuse, if you survived, you had a roommate who was getting, you've never been exposed to domestic abuse in your life, but now you have a roommate who's getting beat up on a regular basis and you're hearing these sounds, or you live next door to a drunk who comes home and beats his wife and you've never heard these sounds before. This is secondhand trauma that gets passed to you, and now you don't realize that when you're in these situations you get tense and you don't know why. These are the things that we dissect. We go through different treatments, plans, and journaling. And when we get to a certain place, we also realize that, you know what? It's time to start unbagging. We have a backpack or we're trying to get to a certain destination. Let's use traveling as an example. So you're traveling, you're going to the airport, you have a destination you need to go to, but you're almost about to miss your flight because you had so much stuff you needed to pack. And then when you get to the counter, they tell you your bag is overweight. And you know what? There's things in here that are not going to pass security clearance. So you need to let go of a lot of it. That's what we're doing today. And this is going to be very hard. I might even start crying because there are things in here that I swore from February 2016 that I would never let go of, just so that I can say, you know what? I know what I said. And I'm going to stand firm in it. And the reason I'm able to let go of it today is because, one, we're no longer wavering. We have boundaries and we know what we said. We know who we are. Remember when I came up with the concept of this video to be the introduction to the trauma center, I told my mom and she was like, "Are you sure?" And I was like, "I'm ready to let go because I cannot take this baggage where I'm going. I absolutely cannot be the face of disarming triggers if I'm walking around with mine. And this is not to put this person in a bad light, because that person also has trauma that needs to be healed. They also have triggers they need to address, and we triggered the hell out of each other. This is just for me to have a sense of peace. And you know what? My son is old enough now where he's starting to take inventory of what's going on around him, and he's also old enough to read. So if I really wanted him to go through this and see how we both showed up for him, he absolutely could. There are times where I showed up as less than for my son outside of co-parenting, where it is embarrassing. There are times where I could have done better. There are times where I could have chose him over opportunities and situations, and we can get into that one day. But we're going to start shredding, and we're going to let go of the past, and we're going to have the confidence and faith to believe that who we are today and who I am today, forget we, who I am today speaks volumes for who I will be in the future. Who I was yesterday is no longer. And this is not to cover up anything. I'm not protecting that person anymore, and I don't need to defend myself. I did what was best with the tools that I had at the time and the resources I had at the time. You can tell by the fidgeting that I'm very nervous about this, but let's get into it. I want you to know that, like, it's not just text messages and emails that are in here. My son has a number of diagnoses. There are medical doctor's notes, there's doctor's notes to legal teams, there's witness statements, discharge papers. Obviously, I'm going to keep my court documents. I'm going to keep my mediation notes just for, you know, because I have to. But there's witness statements from daycares, there's conversations, and just, for example, the first time I registered my son for daycare, I had let his father know, okay, I'm registering him for daycare. I'm going back to school. I'm ready to go back out there. And I showed him how much the monthly fees were. I said, I have not yet been approved for childcare subsidy. And if you're watching this and don't know what that means, it means that the government covers a portion of your childcare fees based on your income. And at the time, I had no income, so my childcare fees ended up being $0, but it had not been approved as yet. So I said to him, okay, this is the situation. And we were actually at a doctor's appointment for my son at the time. And I showed him the paperwork. He left, and I got a call from the daycare maybe. Jay, your volume, please. I got a call from the daycare maybe 2 days later. Hey, Elisha, this is so and so from so and so. We just got a very weird call, and I wanted to run it by you. I said, what's up? Is your son's father's name XYZ? And I'm like, yes. She said, well, we had a gentleman call here pretending like he was going to register his child for daycare to see if we had space. And by the time we got through the conversation and I asked him for the name of the child, he said your son's name. And I was like, is this happen to be the same? And she's like, I realized that he was only calling to confirm the information that you gave him. So I thought that I would. I have that note here. I have that exchange between me and the daycare in email. So it's not just conversations between me and him, it's conversations that he says never happened. There's times where my son, I shared a video, again, you can go back and watch it, where my son never actually spoke in full sentences. He had speech delay. And again, like I said, number of diagnoses and testing that we were going through. And he would come home sometimes from his visits with different markings, rashes, and situations. And I would say to him, I'd ask him obviously what happened. And in his little 2-3-year-old way, he'd explain it to me. And so I have pictures of that. These are all things I'm ready to let go of. These are all things that I'm no longer ready to revisit. It's going to even be hard to edit this video and post it, child, because I don't want to rewatch it. But these are all things that you have to let go of and to change the way that I show up for my son. Co-parenting situation made me very nervous. So at one point I had roommates, and the roommate situation wasn't the healthiest. And I'd be very nervous about what they posted on social media and the state of the house, to the point where I was like, y'all know this man has me in court, right? Y'all know that this man thinks I'm an unfit mother. Y'all know that this man will go to any lengths to prove that I'm an unfit mother, not because he wants to be a fit parent, but because he's angry at the fact that he is one. Like I said, sex is a 3-stage negotiation process, and it leaves unhealed trauma wounds for every party involved, and that includes parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, everybody who wants to have a relationship with this child. For both my parents and for his mother, this is their first grandchild, right? You want the best for your grandchild. And I really wish that I had a better relationship with her. I wish I had the opportunity for her to get to know me for myself, as opposed to the version of me that she was told exists. And I spent a lot of time trying to defend my character. I spent a lot of time trying to defend my pregnancy. I hid my pregnancy for the most part because we had a lot of mutual friends, and some of those witness statements are from mutual friends who witnessed that I went to every length to protect my child. He didn't want to be named, so I didn't name him, and it made it seem like I didn't know what was going on, but I was very aware. And these are all things that I have to let go of. These are all things that I can't continue to rehearse in my mind. And that's another symptom of trauma, is you rehearse the situation over and over again. What did I say? What did I do? Where did I go wrong? How could I have changed this? What could I have done differently? Ooh, child, the situations are endless. And this was another form of protection for me to be able to say, well, actually, this is what happened. And if I was to have advice for anybody who's unsure of themselves and they're co-parenting with a narcissist, as much as you need to do what is possible to protect yourself and your child, I would tell you to stop engaging, stop arguing, stop talking. If you can, put everything in writing, but heal yourself. Identify your triggers and your trauma responses, because those are the things that they are banking on for you to show up with. And if you do not give them that trauma response, you'll eventually stop getting the arguments. When I stopped reacting in certain ways, I saw a frustration in him. And what I don't want is for my son to look back and say, all my mom ever did was argue and cry. Because right now, You have a toxic employer that creates PTSD as well, that you will also one day need to shred, because you cannot carry it into every job that you go into, because then you will be the toxin in that environment. That is for later. And that is one of the things that we also discuss in the trauma center. We don't just dissect triggers and what happened to you, we dissect how you show up in certain situations and environments. And there are, after you've done the I Am Triggered workbook, there's the option to go further with disarming financial triggers, disarming substance abuse triggers, disarming sexual addictions, and so on, which I'll get into later. But yeah, let's get into this. I feel like this is going to take me all day because I'm already hungry and need to take a break. Not only did I not work on and heal my trauma prior to becoming a parent, I experienced so much more trauma while I was pregnant. And I had been told from a young age that I'd probably not be able to have kids. And I had tried for years. I was in a relationship before that was on and off. And I had tried and tried. And then there were just so many different circumstances and situations where I was like, it's just never going to happen. And I had been diagnosed with different diagnoses when it came to my uterus. At this point, there's the you might have endometriosis, you might have polycystic ovarian syndrome. There are cysts on my ovaries, and sometimes they twist, and I can feel when I'm ovulating. And I have a uninverted uterus. I don't know. I have Marfan syndrome. Any pregnancy that I do have is high risk of me and or the fetus passing away. So my entire pregnancy was high risk with the Marfans, and then came the complications with my cervix being incompetent and my uterus not being. Like at one point when I was in labor, I remember the nurse being in there. I feel two, and I'm like, two what? Don't tell me I came this far for you to tell me you feel two children, child. I don't have twin money. She was like, no, no, no. I felt like it felt like two sacks. It felt like two uteruses. I'm not sure what I'm feeling. And I was like, well, then stop narrating as you're in there. So now I don't know what she felt two of, but I have one child. Praise the Lord. I have the diagnosis of my short cervix. A lot of things that I went through when I was pregnant, he would tell me I was lying about. And these were all documented experiences that I'm okay with letting go of now. When I say I have doctor's notes and different witness statements from medical professionals, it's not just in regards to what they've witnessed with him, it's in regards to my healthcare and what I experienced with being high risk. 9 weeks pregnant, I went to Brampton Civic Hospital, and that should say enough. If you're from Brampton or from the GTA, you already know. You don't go to Brampton Civic with any form of pregnancy issues, because you might walk out with your pitney. I did not like the diagnosis that I got that day. They said that I was miscarrying. They had measured me at 9 weeks, and I was actually, it says that I was 9 weeks pregnant, but I was actually 7 weeks. So I said, let me correct myself. I was 7 weeks pregnant when I went to the hospital with bleeding. They diagnosed me with having a miscarriage, a spontaneous abortion. I told his father what happened, and I didn't hear from him again after that for another a couple of weeks. I think I heard from him again in April. And that's one of the conversations that I have in here that I swore I was never letting go of, that I'm going to let go of today. I ended up calling my family doctor and telling him what happened. And my family doctor called the doctor in the emergency room and ripped them a new one, because they were like, how did you measure this fetus at 9 weeks? Why'd you tell this girl she's having a miscarriage and that fetus is very strongly beating inside of her? And you can see he came here early, but he came here determined and ready. My son is well and alive. Had I followed their instructions, I'm not sure if my son would be here today. Based off of that conversation, he believed that I had an abortion and came back to bring talks to me a couple weeks later. And that's one of the conversations that, child, I'm not ready to let go of, but I have to let go of it, because it doesn't matter. I don't need to prove it to anybody. I don't need to walk with it for the rest of my life. It's unnecessary baggage that is weighing me down and making it hard for me to move forward in life. And while I'm struggling with this trauma, people have gone on with their lives and are living quite happily. Like I said, my pregnancy was extremely traumatic, an extremely traumatic delivery. I have a newborn who's premature now, who's in and out of the hospital, and now I'm watching. There was a time where I couldn't hear him cry, because every time I heard him cry, I would hear the sounds of the beeping in the hospital, of his heart rate going up. He had this specific cry and scream that felt painful. And there was one time that he did a chest x-ray, and I just remember him screaming at the top of his lungs, "I'm not going to cry." And it traumatized me to the point where I couldn't hear him cry without, "What's wrong with my baby?" June 2017, I remember this. Me and his father got into an argument, and that was the first time after having my son that I went to the convenience store and bought a small pack of regular Belmonts, and I started smoking cigarettes for another 2 years until I started vaping, and I became dependent on nicotine. And it caused, like, when I say this was like back to back trauma, because I also had other things going on in my life at the same time. I was suffering from what I didn't know was an eating disorder, body dysmorphia, having been extremely underweight before getting pregnant, wanting to maintain my postpartum weight, wanting to be an amazing mother, having people in my ear telling me, "Wow, I didn't know you were capable of doing this. You are actually an amazing mom, and I didn't think you would be capable." People who didn't know that I had been raising kids since I was like 15 years old. Okay, my godson, I call him my son, my son's son. Okay, him and his sister are my firstborns, because that was my first full, like, woof. So I wasn't new to this. I was true to this. The only difference was now it was fully my responsibility, and there was nobody to hand them off to, and I had to learn it as I was going. And as I'm learning, I have this person in my ear like, "My mom's been in childcare for 28 years. She knows more than you." And I'm like, "But does she know my child, and does she know me? Let's give this child," and like, I don't know how much of this rant I'm going to keep in this video, but I was extremely, extremely traumatized after the car accident. I feel comfortable driving on highly populated and dense highways. After I had my son, his father didn't have a car yet, so I was constantly driving between the hospital and picking him up at a halfway point. After that stopped, I was, "Oh, you need to bring him once a week so my family can have a relationship with him." And I would, at any kind of weather trial, and I was having, like, I was gripping the steering wheel, breastfeeding and pumping. So there were times where if I was stuck in traffic, I had a hand pump and I would start pumping in the car. My son did not like being in the car seat at certain times of day. So like, my 407 bill right now is my trauma. My 407 bill is the result of my trauma. So every time I renewed my sticker, I would only pay what was reported to MTO and not actually my full bill, so that I could get my sticker and move on with life. So my 407 bill, child. My 407 bill's high. I used to either take back roads from Brampton to the west end of Toronto. So this is what I mean by the domino effects of trauma. So when we don't deal with it, we create open doors for more unhealed wounds, and that can impact your finances, your credit, your debt, people pleasing, overstimulation, just constantly on the go and burnt out. And I don't know if I slept until I started dealing with my fear of driving again. And it's not that I stopped driving, because I couldn't. I was going to and from doctor's appointments. So I was living in a part of Brampton where I could walk to the GO station, luckily. So if we had doctor's appointments downtown Toronto, I would take the GO inside, struggle with the stroller and the stairs. I luckily had a carrier most of the time. And for the first year and a half, I didn't really go anywhere. Sometimes my friends would drag me out. I did end up talking to somebody at one point, which my trauma showed up into that relationship. I don't know if it's a relationship, friendship, situationship, toxic ship. My trauma showed up, and this goes to show that, like, I threw out a letter I had received from somebody I had a crush on when I was like 14, and they said in the letter that I had layers and I needed to learn how to be vulnerable. And the moment I was vulnerable with them, I got hurt. I didn't know how to regulate my emotions at all. And every time somebody was like, "Be vulnerable with them," I would be vulnerable with them, and I'd get hurt and find out that they were just using it as an access and entryway. So I had to learn, while dealing with my trauma, how to regulate my emotions, who to be vulnerable with, and when to stop sharing, because I overshared. As it was happening, I would be tweeting through it. As it was happening, I would be posting through it. So this is me dealing with that and the outcome of who I showed up as. There are people who don't associate with me because of the reputation I have online. There are people who don't associate with me because of what others have told them about me. There's people, and you have to honor that, that the labels that you receive throughout life Whether or not you agree with them, at some point that may be the way that you showed up in somebody else's story. And there's going to be times where you accept apologies that you never receive, but there's also times where you need to step up and apologize to other people for the way that you showed up in their life. I say this to say that while I'm going through this process, I'm starting to, it's not just about the co parenting with a narcissist that is being addressed today. It's all of the trauma that I experienced in the last 8 years since conceiving. It's funny enough, a couple days ago was the anniversary of the first day of my last period before I got pregnant. And I only remember this day because a friend I had at the time was in labor when I got my last period before getting pregnant. And they were a witness to the first couple months of my pregnancy and conversations that were had. And that relationship in itself was not healthy. It was constantly going over and above to be like, and I shared this in a video on Instagram. Again, you can go and watch previous videos. I don't need to rehash them, but people pleasing has you showing up to conversations less than who you are. You start to identify yourself beyond your trauma responses. You see where you showed up and you were just begging for people to love you and validate you and appreciate you. So you did too much. You showed up and did too much. Like, you would give them a place to live. You would go above and beyond to get them stable while you're not stable yourself. And the moment that they're stable, okay, you're not healthy for me anyways. And they've taken. So I'm processing a lot of this, but at the same time, I'm also congratulating myself for having done the best that I could to get to this point that I'm at today. Some of what I'm shredding actually has no relation to it. I don't keep it. It was said that the money that is sent in form of child support or any money that I'm making was not being used to support my child. So what I did was print my bank statements. So I'm looking at my bank statements, right? The only one taking time off work, paying for parking, paying for gas, going to this doctor's appointment, going to that doctor's appointment. And I still had doctor's appointments for myself. So it's also been hard to maintain employment because of that. I find that once I get into work environments and they acknowledge that I'm a single mom, it's all fine and dandy until they realize that I'm a single mom to a child with special needs. And once they realize just how much goes into it, and like last year for grade 1, he missed so many days of school because he was either sick or had doctor's appointments, and it caused me to miss out on work. And I realized how I was being treated differently in the workplace because of it. There's times where I've had to take leaves of absences. There's times where I've had to take leaves of absences from employments because not just because of what I had going on, but also because it started to impact my mental health. It's been hard to maintain employment. It's been hard to move forward because I feel like I'm always being pulled a little bit back. And then when I start to move forward, it's either I'm being served to go to court, or I'm not a good mom, or I'm this and I'm that, and I'm keeping his child from him. And I had to keep all this evidence child to be like, in 2017, I had not been cleared to go back to work after my car accident yet. I also needed a form of income. I was on Ontario Works. This is a level of transparency. I was making $707 per month with a newborn who had dietary needs as well. I was alternating between breast milk and formula because I was being bullied to drop off my infant alternate weekends when he was primarily breastfed. And that's another doctor's note that I'm going to be shredding today. And his I didn't know you could get a prescription. I don't know if this was a thing at the time. Now apparently you can get a prescription for formula when the doctors recommend that your child be on this formula for dietary restrictions. But we were on so much, he had so much sensitivity to the point where I've had to cut him out of onesies, bro. Like the poop was up his back. He was projectile vomiting, again, in and out of doctor's appointments. And then we found out that I wasn't crazy. There was something going on. He had severe sleep apnea. He had his tonsils and adenoids removed August 2018. And when they did all the workup and like, no, his tonsils look normal. There's nothing wrong with him. Da, da, da. After his surgery, they were like, okay, you know what? We were shocked when we took out his tonsils because they were actually a loony sized on each side, and it looked normal through the ultrasound because they were innies, so you couldn't see them until they couldn't see how large his tonsils were until they took them out, and that was obstructing his airways. All that to say, I was extremely triggered when people were like, you need to go look work, and I would have loved to. I was in school at one point. I've been in school several times over the years, and it's just, my son's always going to be my priority. And if I can't show up as my best self at at my place of employment, especially without being triggered by my employer and having to choose between parenting and doctor's appointments and sick kids and this and that, then if I have to sit on welfare, I'm gonna sit on like until I get some form of disability, child. We gonna do what needs to be done. And right now, I'm not working. I'm homeschooling, and as you can see here, like who's home, completely homeschooling, helping him catch up because he was so far behind last year with his different barriers and challenges. And I have no regrets. And as much as I'm not on Ontario Works right now, if it gets to that point, then that's what I'm going to have to do. And I have no shame in the game about it. So let's go. This is one of my least favorite folders. It started in 2017 when I started to be accused of using the child support for myself. I started keeping receipts. I wasn't working, like I've stated earlier. I was only making $707 per month. Still needed to take care of myself and my child. I am 6'5", so that means I can't buy clothes in Canada. As a matter of fact, the year I had my son, or the year after, the store Long Tall Sally that I buy my clothes from and Payless closed in the same month. So, and I say Payless because Payless was one of the only stores that had my shoe size in it. And it was affordable because it's Payless, child. I had no shame in my game. I bought my shoes from Payless, okay, because they were the only place in Ontario that had my shoe size, okay. Those stores closed. I had to rely on shopping online and paying duties for my clothing to this day. When I got my settlement, or one of my first settlement checks for the car accident, I used it to buy clothes for myself and a winter jacket that lasted me 3 years until it completely shredded and fell apart. Now I don't have a actually the winter jacket I have now, one of my close friends bought for me, but I don't buy anything for myself unless I absolutely can afford it at the time. I don't have winter boots. I don't have shoes. I say all this to say that $707 I used one point to buy the crib. Why not spending the money on my child? And this is the receipts, and is not to put anybody in a negative light. This video is not to use this as evidence later going on that look at all those things that I shredded and I could have kept them, and nope. This is me doing exactly what I would expect to be done in the trauma center. And we started to dissect what you're holding on to that you need to let go of to make room for who you truly are. The things that I need to let go of before I can even start coaching anybody. Because how dare I tell you to let go of things that no longer serve you while I'm holding on to text messages and conversations and receipts from 2016. I say I have witness statements, I also mean from his side of his family as well, that spoke on his character and the way that he was handling the situation. And I held on to this because, like, if he took me to, I actually was gonna use it in court the last time he took me to court, and I chose not to. I no longer have to prove myself to anybody. The only opinion that matters is my son, and that comes with healing. What you experienced was real, what you went through was real, your trauma is real, and no matter how people try to control the narrative and control the way that you're viewed, all that matters is how you show up and handle the situation. So we're no longer going to be pulling up the handy dandy receipts to be like, well, actually, on August 26th, 2018, you said, and as a matter of fact, even your cousin and your uncle and your auntie and your daddy and your, we don't need to do, we're not doing that no more. I said what I said, and I'm standing on it. On Christ, the solid rock, I stand, and all other ground is sinking sand. And if I know anything about my heavenly Father, He gonna back me up in the spirit if I need it. So I no longer need to prove any of what's in here. I'm proud of myself. I'm going to be tempted to read through some of this because, again, it's not just how he showed up; it's how I showed up and how I can show up differently going forward. I don't know when things got misconstrued, child, but there were times where he would speak to me as if I wanted him, or as if I wanted to be in a relationship with him, as if I was trying to play house with him and trying to build a family with him. And that was never the case. I don't want to be in a relationship with somebody who treated me the way I was treated when I was pregnant, treats my child the way that he's treated my child, whether or not he acknowledges or accepts the way he showed up in my life, in my son's life. And I had set a standard and a boundary that, like, you're not dealing with an average child. You're dealing with a child who has this and this and this in place. And you can't just take up an infant and say, I can learn on my own. And sometimes letting him learn on his own was at my son's detriment and put my son in unsafe situations. I'm reading this and it's like, I'm selfish because I don't want to play house with you. Well, all right then. You know, when you're playing house, Dolly House have to mash up at some point, right? I don't know if there's anything I would have done differently in this conversation because I'm gonna always do what's best for my child and follow the orders of and recommendations of healthcare professionals, physicians, and people who show up and are fully equipped to take care of my child in that season will be the people who take care of my child in that season. If you're not coming to doctor's appointments or you're not listening to the advice of the doctor when I'm relating it back to you, I'm not leaving my child. I don't care who you are. I'm not leaving my child with you. To this day, my child's 7 years old, and there's only few people who I'll call and be like, "Can you watch my son for me because XYZ, and it's going to be through this time, and when he's with you, you need to XYZ." He still has things in place in order for him to stay regulated. This is a child who you need to stick to your routine and keep your word. He's actually even on medication now, so we can't be out here just doing any and anything. Again, if you're co-parenting with a narcissist, you cannot have a people-pleasing spirit. You have to stand firm in your no, your yes, your who you are needs to be like, even when you see that their behavior is adjusting and changing, that's where a lot of my wavering came from, because I would see sides where like, oh, we can actually co-parent. Let me try to be your friend. Let me try to be cool. No, you need to stand firm in your no's and your yeses. Do not try to people please. Do not try to like, oh, there's an open door for me to try to be nice to this person. Maybe they will appreciate and value the things that I do for them. And there's things that I've done for him that he'll never tell people that I did for him because it contradicts the argument and narrative that he puts out there about me. Co-parenting with a narcissist, I would absolutely tell you to just stand firm on your word. Stop engaging. You don't need to please them. Do what's best for your child. If you need to have witnesses to conversations, have witnesses to conversations, honestly, and hold them accountable. And one thing a narcissist does not like is being held accountable. And if you're going to do that, you need to be able to stick to your guns, sis. Because you picking a fight when you do that. You are picking a fight when you do that. You need to be sure of who you are, whose you are, and if you're gonna hold them accountable, do not waver in your responses. Do not even so much as let the reaction be a negative one, because that will be the one that is used against you and held over your head. Don't do it. There was one time where we had a meeting with our parents, and I had brought up the girl that he had pregnant at the same time as me. And there's actually a witness statement from her in here that I'm also going to be shredding. And he used that as a moment to turn around and try to slut shame me in front of my parents. And I remember walking away from this, and I remember I was lukewarm at this time. I wasn't fully Holy Ghost filled and sanctified at the time. Thank you, Lord, for salvation and deliverance. Thank you for pulling me up. My mouth was still unclean, child. I still had that cussing spirit of Peter on me. I was ready to slice ears, and I was like, I am a dutty, insert word here. And my parents know I'm a dutty, insert word here. I was like, who you gonna, you trying to shame me because you sitting here all out lying to your mother? Listen, if it's one thing about it, is my parents know who I am, and there's nothing you can say, especially to my mother, that's gonna be like shocked. And if he wasn't happy, then he would take it out on my child and blame me for it. He'd say things like, "You're keeping me away from my son by not agreeing to this, and this, and all." But I did a lot of fighting. I fought with doctors. I fought with therapists. I was fighting with lawyers because of the car accident. I didn't feel fully supported. There were times where I felt like I was in this alone, and I didn't have anybody to fully back me up. And the thing is that the people that we're witnessing this in real time, we're always ready to be like, if he says anything to me, da 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 da. Why are you waiting for him to say something to you? You see what he's doing to your child. Say something to him. Pull up his pants and dress the talks, bro. I'm glad nothing ever escalated, but I can't believe I'm shredding these conversations. But to God be the glory, and all the honor and praise goes to my heavenly Father. And this is demonstrating a certain level of obedience. I remember had when it came in my spirit to get rid of these stuff, and I was like, what if he sees this video and it's perfect? Let's go. disrupt the peace. And my Heavenly Father said, and what if he does? Do you have faith in me or not? Do you know your identity in Christ or not? Can you walk away from this or not? Are you letting it go or not? Any future conversations we have does not need to bring up the past on my end, because what happened happened, what's done is done. The way you showed up is the way you showed up, and I really hope and pray that if I can do the work, he can do the work too. And I called him out his name, child. I called him out his name a lot, but he also called me out mine. Anyways, it's not. Lord, forgive me for the way I showed up in these conversations, because it was not godly. How he carries himself is on him. How I respond is on me. And how you treat your trauma determines how you heal your trauma. And a lot of us are running around spewing blood everywhere from unhealed wounds, wondering why we just can't get right, child. That wound stinks. You know what an infected wound smells like? And it's there pussing up and it's burning and it's you about to get your whole arm amputated because you won't treat that wound properly. That's your trauma. Showing up in every argument, in every relationship, at every job, every friendship, every drink you have, every partner you cheat on. When you're an aggressive cheater, you have wounds, child, and you are creating a wound in somebody else. But this conversation is with somebody who shared that if you don't cater to his feelings, then you're always going to have arguments with him. That's been him his entire life. And I saved this conversation because I was like, I don't care if I hurt you in the process of you sharing this information with me. You've now given me an arsenal to put in my back pocket. You've now added a rock into my bag that when I'm ready to stone him, stone in, come in. That was wrong. That was wrong. And I should have treated this relationship with the same respect that I expect and not used it as a chess piece to be like, see, I'm not doing any. But this is also what happens when you have unhealed trauma in terms of being traumatized and silenced. I experienced a lot of as a child, and I was conditioned and groomed into keeping silent and not speaking. And the ways this was done was like, nobody's going to believe you anyways. Or here, take this money and be quiet. I was groomed from a very, very young age to not have confidence in who I am and what I'm experiencing and what I'm going through. I always felt the need to have backup. There was one time my brother was like, this is, I think, before I became a mom. He's like, you take pictures of everything. And I said, my fear is that I will get old and not remember the good times because I'm so weighed down by trauma that I gain all. Like they say that depression, anxiety, and trauma causes Alzheimer's. And my biggest fear is getting old and having Alzheimer's and not remembering the good times in my life. I took pictures and saved everything. There's not like my phone was there for everything. And before phones was digital cameras. And before digital cameras, you would please believe I was at Walmart developing that film. My trauma response to the memories I suppressed that I didn't realize were there. I went through my whole adult life like, oh, luckily for me, I don't know how it makes me lucky. I never experienced that as a child. And so the memories came back and I was like, whoa, I normalized abuse. I normalized being invalidated. I normalized not having a voice. And I did not know who I am or who I was. I didn't know who I was. And sitting here today, I can say that I don't need to question or doubt. If I have a conversation and I know I had a conversation, I don't need to pull the conversation back up to be like, I said this at this time to this person. I know what I said. I know who I am and I know whose I am. So I shouldn't have taken this conversation to use it as a weapon. Luckily, I never actually did. I don't think. And if I did, I apologize. The time he served me, he said I owed him 15 or between $1,300 and $1,500 in child support. He said he overpaid child support. As a trauma response, I went through every e-transfer and printed it. Every email and printed it. Every conversation he said we never had, I printed it. I sent a list of medical appointments. There's a list of doctors' names, this, that. He said I couldn't be on my son's life insurance as a contributor. It's all here. Here is another one of these, and there's like 4 binders here. We're an hour into shredding, an hour and a half into shredding. I'm not reached nowhere yet. This is all me feeling the need to always have to defend myself and not having the confidence and courage in my voice and who I say I am, and feeling the need to always have to defend myself. No, 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 no. I never had to handle it this way, but this is the only way that I knew how. Parenting with a narcissist, just stop talking. If you need to get a third party involved to mediate on your behalf, do so. Protect and preserve your mental health at all costs, because when you're done and you're left picking up the pieces, it's your child that has to see you falling apart. What I learned having dealt with my trauma is you do not have to accommodate everything and everybody. Not everybody is going to like and be in control of the way you show up to triggering conversations. Spend time with y'all children, women and men. Okay, because there are toxic mothers out there. There are women who ain't do that. I'm sitting here doing a whole YouTube video instead of sitting with my child. Sit with y'all children. Spend time with your kids, okay? He was on a wait list for therapy because of that situation I mentioned earlier where police were called on me. I had a developmental pediatrician who I consulted after that situation with the police, who recommended certain steps that be taken place. And this is not the first time that a physician had recommended these steps be taken place. The first time that the nutritionist recommended it, I told the nutritionist no, and the nutritionist ghosted me. And when I supplied that evidence in court, Justice McPherson asked him, is this real or was this a scare tactic? There were certain times in court where none of what I said was taken seriously. He did include several emails himself. I'm sure he has a pile of emails and text messages himself, child, to make me look in a certain light, obviously with the context taken away from it, whatever the case may be. And I remember sitting there like, why would I involve an entire system just to get to scare somebody into parenting? The second time that this was brought up, I don't know what the conversation was when he was done speaking to that department, but they ended up closing the situation in his favor. But why did I bring this up? The developmental pediatrician recommended that my son do therapy, so I put him on the wait list for therapy. And when he got to the top of the wait list, the therapist said, "You're in family court, so I will not be able to offer you my services." Essentially, she said she did not want to be subpoenaed into court. And if you live in Ontario, you understand that a lot of these government funded resources have quite the wait list, and I can't afford therapy out of pocket. And these are the things that I wish I did have in place even now for my son, and that I wish I had in place for me as a child. Being one of the only consistent adults in his life, it is hard because I'm teacher, mom, nurse when he's sick. When we play fight, I'm getting on his level and playing with him with his toys and all of these things. And he doesn't have any other siblings. He doesn't have any close kids his age in my family or within my friend group, really. So it's hard, and it's hard to find. I want him to have that adult that he can talk to and trust and communicate with, so he can feel safe even if I'm the problem, because there's times, parents, that we are the problem in our kids' lives. It's frustrating because you see the wait list and you're like, what do you mean you're not going to take him on because we're in family court? He needs therapy. And I can understand that, because if it did get subpoenaed, I absolutely would have been like, cough it over. As you can see, I would have been like, bring the receipts. I felt the need to prove something. I felt like one day my son was going to turn to me and be like, Mommy, how come, you know, this, and this? And I could have been able to pull out this tab and been like, actually, I did. I did do that, despite what you're being told and fed. And the reality is that is a trauma response. Are there things that essentially can help? when your child becomes of age and starts asking certain questions, absolutely. I was that kid who always flipped through the photo album. I was obsessed with my mom's photo album. My dad didn't really have one, and I was obsessed with who's this and what was I like at this age, and constantly trying to read. I didn't realize that I was trying to re-jog these memories, but I was constantly flipping through the photo album, and I'm just obsessed with myself as a child. And said I didn't want my son to get to a point where he had questions and I didn't have answers. Are there certain things that when you're co-parenting with or without a narcissist that you want to hold on to? Absolutely. But if you're holding on to it to prove a point, defend yourself, let it go. This is a whole email thread that I know he has. He printed it with the court documents last time, but like I said, I no longer have anything to prove. There's emails about bleeding, about skin conditions, about all of these things, and it's just so don't rely on your doctors and their notes, because sometimes they don't even share the full results or report with you, hoping that you don't understand anything that's in the report. Keep your doctor's notes for yourself. Keep them. Go over it, because sometimes you have to hold your doctors accountable, okay, child? And you need to be on top of your health, because at the end of the day, they see you and they move on to another patient. And while they move on to another patient, you have to sit at home with like, what's this? WebMD gonna tell you you dying. WebMD gonna tell you you have cancer. Stay on top of your medical health. Stay on top of it. Go see the doctor, child. You do need to unfortunately let go of, and that includes photos in your phone, text messages, social media posts. If you need to, you do need to go through and clean up your online fingerprint. My Facebook, for example, I've been in groups since 2010. I've things that no longer resonate with me. There's photos on there with people I don't even talk to, I haven't spoken to since high school. Clean them up. Get rid of it. Let it go. Get up out of here trying to take money from people. I was working two full-time jobs at the same time to make ends meet and to be able to have a bit of a social life. Child, I was burnt out. That second full-time job did not last long. I was doing too much. I was burnt out. And I should have never ever signed the contract that I did to work in the place that I signed to work up at. And not every opportunity is a blessing. The space that I thought I was going to be working in ultimately didn't end up being the space that I worked in. I had a really dark corner, really small, couldn't fit. And I was judged from the moment I walked in there. And I made a lot of critical mistakes that impacted my business, ultimately resulting in me dissolving my business. You can't work two full-time jobs, be in school, start a business, parent, and be in family court at the same time. Just don't do it. And ultimately, the best thing for you to do is to stay in one lane, pick where you're going to excel at, and focus on that. I give God thanks for saving me at the time that He did, still loving me enough to pull me out, because you really shouldn't be sitting here right now. I had plans, child, and none of those plans involved me sitting here telling this story. I saw my childhood play out in my child. I want to say I was 6 years old when I saw one of my parents call the police on the other, and we watched as the police pulled up and hold my other parent at gunpoint. The day the police were called on me, and I wasn't even doing anything, I walked up to the car to introduce myself to the partner in the passenger seat that 2 weeks prior I was given permission to introduce myself to. And this is why everything has to be in writing. This is why everything has to be, don't even walk into situations that you were given permission to walk into. I feel like I was set up to the point where my landlord heard him yelling outside and came to speak to the police herself to defend me. And I remember sitting on the bench thinking, this is everything I didn't want my child to go through. And sitting here today being able to let go of all of this and say, you know what, you no longer get to live rent free in my mind. You no longer get to control the way I show up to situations. You no longer get to manipulate my trauma responses. You no longer get to trigger me. You don't control me. I know who I am and whose I am. it makes room for me to be a better parent and to show up differently, to take control of everything that has happened in the last 8 years alone and say, you know what? Yes, I was in a car accident, but I survived. Everything happens for a reason. And I've said it before and I will say it again. The story of Job is so beautiful because while the enemy was seeking to steal, kill, and destroy everything related to Job, all his children died. Even his friends and his wife were like, why don't you curse that God that you're worshiping? How do you sit here while everything's being stripped from you? Though you slay me, yet will I trust him. And God is taking away every area of my life that I no longer need to carry so that I can walk in my full identity in Christ, to be who he's called me to be, to walk by the name that he calls me. And I no longer need to identify with the labels that society has put on me. I used to be like, all right, I'll be that. I'll be that. You say I'm this, then I'll be that. If that's who you say I am, then, but that's not who I am. That's trauma. Don't start a business until you are certain of who you are, whose you are, and how to say no. You're not going to be people pleasing. You're not doing it from a stretched out desperation place of needing money and needing this and needing that. Look to the hills from where your help comes from. You cannot do everything on your own. And running to all of these outlets trying to fill a void is giving you more work to do in the overflow. I also love the story in Genesis of Sarai, Hagar, and Abram, Sarah and Abraham. And God said to Abraham, Abram, I'm going to make a nation of you. You will be the father of many nations. And Sarai was like, us two old farts having children. That's crazy. Go sleep with my maidservant. And the maidservant got pregnant, gave birth to Ishmael, and Sarah didn't realize, or Sarai did not realize just what that meant. There was a disdain towards the situation. There was a certain level of jealousy, I'd say. And then when God did fulfill his promise and give Sarah Isaac, ultimately ended up with Hagar and Ishmael being sent into the wilderness. And what you produce in your season of impatience while you're in the wilderness, you have to deal with in your season of preparation to go into your overflow and abundance. When God has a promise for you, he's going to fulfill that promise. What you do in the season of waiting for that promise determines how long you have to wait for your promise to come to pass. Be obedient, be patient, and trust yourself. Healing is absolutely necessary. I would not advise you to start having relations with anybody until you're healed. And this is from a place of choice. If you have the choice to do it, don't do it. I wouldn't advise you to get into a relationship or get married until you've done the work on self. As much as my marriage has not worked out, it's given me the opportunity to know that, you know what, when I do meet my kingdom spouse, how to show up into that marriage and the things that I need to work on for self so that I'm not bringing all of this baggage with me. That's about 2 or 3 years that we've gone through so far. But remember, we also have, this is my iPad, my iPod. I can't even imagine how much music is on here. It was engraved, and you could only use the headphones to change the music. This is one of the first folders that binders that I started, and I actually put it in date order. These are all court documents. Luckily, I don't have to shred any of this, and I'll just update it with the recent court documents. Everything that's ever been filed or gone through the courts, I'm not shredding. I will be keeping, because listen, I'm not paying for the courts to reprint these things in the event, God forbid, I need to use it again or I get served or whatever the case may be. This is not for spite. This is just for legal purposes. It's responsible. I won't be going through this full. I also have this bag to go through. We've been at this for 2.5 hours so far. This is going to be interesting. This is not organized. Emails, photos, pictures, conversations, text messages, you name it. This I want to say. So the first round, oh no, there's still some 2016 in here. There's some 2016 in here. From mediation and from physicians was to do a parenting log whenever my child was being exchanged. This conversation is from 2018 that shows me giving instructions or giving updates on the recent developments and changes and where he's last at and asking for that information in return. do this, or I forgot to say that, or by the way, just so that it doesn't come back. Let it go. All of this is to say that I did far too much talking. There's so much on the floor. This is for my girlies who are in toxic relationships, situationships, co-parenting with a narcissist, and you find yourself always having to prove yourself because you're delusional, you're crazy, there's something wrong with you, you're making things up, you live in your own reality, that never happened, da 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 da, and now you feel the need to walk around with all of these receipts. You're not crazy, you're not delusional. Stop talking. Stop talking. You're not doing yourself or your child any good when you argue and go back and forth with somebody who is determined to misunderstand you. This is a harsh word, but I used to get told off because, oh, you don't send my family photos of the baby. So I'm supposed to breastfeed, be in postpartum, go to all these doctor's appointments, update this person with that. Child, please. Somebody pick up a book, a bottle, do some laundry, help a sister out. I'm tired. When my child was 2 years old and he was struggling with emotions, period. There was we were having conversations about if we're on the spectrum of autism because and I bought our first dog because it was like, listen, I was on every group and forum. Listen, if my child has autism, I'm gonna be there to make sure that he gets the best support needed. I'm gonna be that mama. I went and bought him his first dog. We named her Lilo. Her name ended up being changed to Princess. First time I saw him light up. I remember the first time I heard my child laugh without choking on it, and that was, I want to say, about a month after his surgery to remove his tonsils and adenoids. And it was a real hearty laugh, and I remember crying. I actually still have the video, and that's what your laughter sounds like. That's what your cry sounds like without being in pain. We're suggesting to the co-parent it would be good for him to see us together communicating like normal people. So maybe we should do XYZ and take him to here. Maybe a year or two later, that conversation was thrown in my face, and I was trying to play house with him and pretend like we're in a relationship by going out, and he only did it to please me. And if you're doing things to please me, then you've lost the point of the conversation because I don't want you. There's nothing you can do to make me happy. I'm not your child. Like I said, I am daddy's girl. That when you there was a point where if my father went out, if you saw him, you saw me. I was up underneath his armpit. There was nowhere my father. Are you crazy? If we went out together, I was with my dad. So I don't want you to. You don't need to parent me. I don't need you. What you need to do is parent you. Pick me. And I thought we were doing this for him. So what do you mean you did it to please me, child? Don't do these things. If you are co-parenting with a narcissist, chop it up to a lost child. Just say, you know what? If there is no witness, we're not talking. We can do it in mediation. We can do it in counseling or therapy. But what you need to do the most is protect your mental health and stop. Don't engage. If I could do anything over again, I'd shut up. I haven't really reading these anymore because the bottom line is it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I don't. Had I known then what I know now, February 10th, 2016, I would have taken my little traumatized, I need somebody to touch me, too hot to trot behind to somebody else's bed, okay? And made sure that I was proud of the person who I was bringing home to tell my parents I was pregnant for, okay? Whether or not, I always like, growing up, I always wanted to be a mom. Nobody could tell me any different. I was going to be a mom, and I'm going to be a businesswoman who owned multiple businesses and had a condo because I didn't want to have the white picket fence. Like, I word cursed myself from I was a young age. I'm never getting married. I don't want da 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 da. I'm gonna be like, deliver us from Eva. You had told me this at like 19 years old, I would have been like, you're a liar. Stop talking to me. Go back to that future you said you came from and die because that's not true. And what can I do to change the outcome of whatever circumstances you say I'm going to be in? As you can see, there's like, I didn't get tabs. I used sticky notes with every doctor diet. Like every time I said that XYZ is wrong with my son, nothing's wrong with him. So I'd have to print out the name of the diagnosis, the overview, the symptoms, and the doctor's note that went along with it. We're asking for days off of a job, and my manager was jealous of me for whatever reason. She was upset that one of the clients called in and said they'd prefer to speak to me over her because she was rude and disgusting. And realistically, she was rude and disgusting. She ended up bringing me into the owner's office, and the owner happened to be her husband, screamed at me for over an hour, ripped up my vacation request, and then 2 weeks after that, I was fired. So the only thing that I did differently from my life plan was not start a multi-million-dollar business with the condo, but now I want a house with a like I want to live in a gated community now, child. I have bigger dreams for myself than I did, like higher expectations for myself now than I did however many years ago. But we can still get that business. We can still not have to work for people, and we can let go of all the things that happen to us and still walk in excellence. So I think what I'm going to do now is do the rest off camera. Thank you for sitting down with me as I go through my trauma, as I get rid of all of this unnecessary stuff that is weighing me down, slowing me down. I can't take it with me everywhere that I go. I've moved with a lot of this stuff year after year. I've never really had the most stable background or upbringing. I moved a lot, and that's one thing that I never wanted for my child. I know that whatever God is planning and doing for us does not involve instability, insecurity, and a lack of safety. There's going to be provision and supplication wherever we end up. All of that to say, in order for me to move forward, I have to make room. And that doesn't mean to make room even to receive. It just means to make room, to have a light load as I'm walking. I don't need things weighing me back, pulling me back. If I have to keep going back to 2016, child, that means I'm not living in the present. And to my 25-year-old self, I'm sorry. I apologize to you for your lack of support, your lack of safety, your lack of awareness, even doubting whether or not you could show up for yourself. I've got this now. We're in control, and God is doing amazing things in our lives. You've conquered so much. You drove to Florida on a mount, through mountains, over bridges, by your the Holy Spirit was in the passenger seat, child, but you did that. You conquered your fear of driving, and you drove back straight, and you didn't, but you did it. You have found yourself. To the 8-year-old me who felt like nobody listens to you, I'm not expressing myself effectively and people don't understand me, and I feel like I'm being talked over or nobody's listening to me. And to that 8-year-old girl, to that 12-year-old girl, to that 16-year-old girl, to that girl who told people what was going on and they didn't believe her, you're safe now. You don't have to fight anymore. There is a whole world out there that does not involve you carrying your trauma in every room that you enter, in every relationship that you enter. I was a chronic oversharer. It was to the point where I didn't think anybody would believe anything that I was experiencing or going through. So I always sent screenshots to group chats with my friends and conversations, and I trauma dump and trauma dump. I was the crisis friend. And a lot of the friends I had at the time will tell you that a lot of the trauma that I endured was self inflicted. But that was me turning to the only thing that I knew. It was me holding up a mirror to the things that I suppressed and hid without even knowing that's what I was doing. In the trauma center, I want to help those who can't even identify that they need help, who are coping through alcohol and not sure how to navigate even just picking up their Bible and reading and being in relationships, and not just co-parenting with a narcissist, but disappointment, grief, loss, and bereavement, how to show up in your marriage, how to show up in relationships. If you need to have a bottle of wine, you need to have a shot. If you're triggered and the first thing you do is pick up alcohol, you have a drinking problem. If you're triggered and the first thing you do is go outside and have a cigarette, in any state or condition that you're in, you have a nicotine addiction. If you feel unsafe and your first response is to pick up your phone and text somebody so that you can sleep with them, you have a problem. And if you feel abandoned, if you feel like you're not sure why these things bother you or why you responded the way that you did, we disarm these things in the trauma center. I am triggered. And instead of screaming from the top of your lungs, I'm triggered, that's triggering, stop triggering me, figure out where the trigger came from and disarm it. Take the pin out of it, because I said I'm not going to say the B word anymore, because that in itself could be triggering. Take the pin out of the Grenade and start figuring out where the first hit took place. For me, it was my childhood, and it developed into a personality trait that was loud, that was that hid behind clothing. And like I said earlier, I didn't know I had an eating disorder or body dysmorphia, and it didn't start to show itself until a year after I had my son, where I became obsessed with stepping on the scale so I wouldn't be underweight again. And when I got to my goal weight and started losing weight, that was hard. But I also made an idol out of my body when I got to my goal weight and was like, girl, look at that. And you don't need to hide anymore. You can show up as your best self. And there's a version of you who does not rely on the coping mechanisms that you've adopted as pacifiers throughout your life. There is a version of you that is waiting to emerge, that is fighting desperately to be heard and is slowly digging its way out. So if you've made your way through this video, thank you. I hope you gained something from this. I hope that you click the link in my bio, visit www.disciplinedxdesign.com to join the waitlist for the trauma center so you can join our first workshop and get to the point where we're disarming some of your triggers. We will disarm financial triggers, like I said, and the domino effect of the treatment you're currently using as a coping mechanism. I share, and the version of me that's sitting here today's what, January 29th, 2024, will be completely different this time next year in a completely different environment, confident, courageous, brave, and brand new. So thank you for watching. Expect to see more of these videos. Don't expect to see the shredder again. I think we've shredded all of our trauma that was remaining and left unpacked. Like I said, I'm doing the rest off camera because I've been sitting here for maybe 3 hours. So I'm going to go out and spend the day with my son now, because I've spent 3 hours locked up in the bedroom doing this video, and I'm going to organize all of this. For too long, I was under the thumb of people, places, and things that controlled how I showed up. And I felt the need to numb it with alcohol and this, that. And I should have never been in those rooms to begin with. And this is me taking accountability for who showed up to these conversations. So again, thank you for watching. If you're triggered watching this, again, I'm open for book a free discovery call with me. We can go into detail. Again, this is not to shame anybody, not to name anybody, not to blame anybody. This is me taking accountability for the way that I handled things, and this was not necessary at all. This doesn't prove nothing to nobody. This is a pacifier to soothe my lack of identity, to soothe my people pleasing and the need to prove myself to people, and my fear of forgetting who I thought I was, my fear of forgetting what I said, and being manipulated and gaslit to the point where you even have to question what you said and who you are. Don't engage. Stop talking. Stop reacting and respond. If you're reacting, you have not given yourself the chance to hear the conversation, to address the way that you feel and respond from an informative place. Stop reacting. It's not worth it. It doesn't do anything for anybody, and ultimately it gets used against you. So I would say, again, if you're co-parenting with a narcissist, have witnesses if necessary, have a mediator or a third party if necessary, get therapy for both you and your children, get counseling if possible. Again, I know that if you can't afford these things, it might be hard, book a one-on-one discovery call with me. I can help you find community resources within your region. I can help you find, again, government funded stuff do have a wait list, but I can help you, find loopholes in certain situations. As a child and youth worker who graduated from her program with honors, I kind of know my way around some of the social services. I can help you out with that. If you book a one-on-one call with me, if you find that I'm not the best fit, I can refer you to another mentor. I can help you find a mentor in your budget. It's not just about, there's a lot of mentors out right now. There's a lot of digital products, there's a lot of ebooks, there's a lot of marketing strategies. This is not about marketing. This is about your mental health. If you're in therapy and you find yourself after your sessions feeling weighed down, bogged down, and tired, book a one-on-one discovery call with me and we can start your aftercare to process what you're feeling after trauma therapy, after any form of therapy, actually. And then you can go back to your next session prepared for what this is the homework I did after we sat down and talked. And that was a lot of what I had to do, but I didn't have a mentor to walk me through it. So I journaled. And by the time she actually discharged me from her services, she's like, "You don't need me anymore, girl." I still need a therapist, by the way. So if you're a therapist and watching this, I need a therapist. Maybe not a trauma therapist, but I need a therapist. Therapy should never end. Therapy should never end. But thank you again. My name is Alicia Nicole, and I am your trauma therapy, your faith-based trauma focused. I am your faith-based trauma focused life coach, and I am here to help you propel forward in 2024 and beyond. Drop your baggage, disarm your triggers, and start to respond from a healed place. Have a good day. Thank you for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. Follow me on TikTok and Instagram, and refer a friend. If it's not for you, then maybe there's somebody in your circle who is the crisis friend and you can't understand what they're trauma dumping because you came from a well-off family. These are some of the things that I've had to hear before. So instead of triggering them, refer them. Take care.